Hello, everybody. It's so good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. This is the Insights Seminar for the new musical Ride. Yay. I would like to acknowledge Vicki and Carl Zeiger if they're here and extend our gratitude for always sponsoring this wonderful program. And since they're not here, I know many of you know them, so please extend our gratitude when you see them. We just love doing this for all of you. And I know selfishly, I really enjoy doing this as well. So anyway, my name is Kim Heil. I'm the artistic producer and head of casting for the Old Globe. I have here to my left some esteemed guests, members of the creative team of the wonderful new musical that we are premiering, doing the US premiere of right next door. And so I'd just like to introduce them. This is our director, Sarah Meadows.
Hello, hi.
And the writers, lyricists, composers, Freya Catrin Smith.
Hello.
And Jack Williams. So I want for a moment, if you would, to encourage you to imagine behind us a 3 or 4 level bookcase filled with awards, filled with accolades and all sorts of trophies. Because between the 3 of these people next to me, they will have filled that entire bookcase. This is really, it's such an honor for me to be next to them because they are just such decorated artists in the UK and soon to be in the US, I believe. And so I would list them all for you. They're in your program, but just some of the awards that they've won. The Vault Festival Awards for Outstanding New Work and People's Choice, Writers Guild Award nomination for Best Musical Theater Book Writing, What's on Stage Award nomination for Best Off West End Production. And then with Sarah, let's see, 2023 Off West End finalist for Best Director, What's on Stage Award for Best Production. I mean, the list goes on. And so I think we're really, really fortunate to have these wonderful artists on stage. And you all will have an opportunity to ask some questions after I've had, my opportunity first. So hello, hi. I just would love to know, first of all, how this all began. Now, Sarah, I want you to just, you're gonna come next, but I wanna ask the two of you how your collaboration began as writers.
Yeah. Well, Jack and I have known each other kind of forever, actually. So we met when we were 11 years old in maths class at school. And well, we didn't really start writing together for a while after that, but we were both kind of pursuing music at school in different ways. Jack was in a band, and I sometimes did backing vocals for his band. And I was studying music and was doing composition. And it was kind of in our early 20s that we started writing together and exploring musical theatre. We took a show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and that's kind of what started everything. And from there, we've just kept going. Do you want to add anything?
Not really, I think. A good summary. Our first, as Freya said, we originally started by writing kind of pop songs together, and our first musical was a song cycle rather than a full book musical. And we were very inspired by artists like Passing and Paul with their piece Edges, and Cumin and Diamond with their piece Homemade Fusion, which we saw at subsequent Edinburgh Fringes, which really inspired us to give it a go without, I think, we didn't quite have the confidence to attempt the book at that point, but we knew we could half write some songs at least. So we, give it a go, and we got enough nice reviews to kind of buoy our confidence, and led to further collaborations as well.
And so what inspired you, or rather, how did you discover this amazing story of a young woman named Annie Londonderry, who is the subject of the musical Ride?
Yeah, so I kind of have a special interest in women from history, especially forgotten women from history, and telling their stories and sharing their stories and bringing them back to kind of the public attention. So I was just doing research and looking online for potential characters for new shows, and I found a thread on a website called Reddit that was listing kind of different women from history who had been forgotten, and hers kind of leapt off the page at me as something that could be potentially, could work well in a theatrical setting. And so from there, I did a bit more research, and that led me to Peter Zeitlin, who is Annie Londonderry's great-grand-nephew, and he's coming to press night. And we've kind of been in conversation with him from the start, but he lives in Boston, so we actually were fortunate to meet him in November, but we've just had kind of email conversations back and forth, and he's written books on Annie and articles, and so that was really the way in. It started as kind of being what we thought would be a celebratory piece about a woman who cycled around the world, and then learning more and more about her character and her heritage and her backstory, it became something a lot more than that. So yeah, if you're coming to see it, hopefully you'll you'll enjoy that aspect too.
Definitely. I think Peter is, amazing in terms of how he's preserved Annie's legacy. So although in the 1890s, Annie did this amazing thing and was the talk of the town for a few years, when she passed away in 1947, it was actually in poverty and obscurity, and her story had been forgotten at that time. And it wasn't until the early 2000s when Peter did some digging in his family history, found out this amazing woman, and then started a website dedicated to her, wrote 2 books about her.
Yeah, because he didn't know they were related because their family was estranged. So he kind of stumbled on her later in life, and it all went from there. So yeah, really interesting.
So when you started writing the musical, I imagine it looked different from what it is today?
So different. It started as a 20-minute piece, and it was a one-woman piece, and it was just Annie kind of telling her story about the cycle and charting the journey. And we quickly realised after seeing that, it was kind of in a workshop setting, that the most interesting, knotty aspects of who she was were, like, they weren't coming out because Annie, as this larger-than-life, kind of exuberant, fizzy character, would never actually go into those things. She'd never choose to reveal those things about herself. So we needed to bring in a secondary character in order to push those buttons and to get deeper into who she was, and exploit that more. So that's how our secondary character, Martha, came about, who's not real. We made her up.
Got it. And Sarah, you've been with the project now. I mean, it's been around since what year did it first premiere in the UK?
2020.
2019 was the 20-minute workshop. 2020 was the 1-hour version of the piece. Then we did a 90-minute workshop in 2021, and Sarah came aboard for the first full run of the show in 2022.
And how did you come upon the piece, and how did you meet these two?
I just got sent it through my agent, actually. And I remember sitting in a tech for another show and just opening it in a break and listening to the music and just being so captivated by this character and the way that Jack and Freya were telling her story. I thought it was so inherently theatrical, and I just immediately thought this is going to be an incredible thing to tell from my point of view in terms of a production. And then we kind of went from there, really.
Tell me a little bit about the inspiration, or maybe the style of musical theater. Here's the thing. I was told, in my youth that musical theater was inherently an American art form. And you can either disagree or agree with this. But I'm curious, you started off as musical theater writers. What was it about this story that felt like it should be told as a musical?
I can certainly take some of the question. I think you might have your own thoughts as well. But I'm inclined to agree that, Americans have definitely, it feels like an inherently American genre started in America, and they've done so much to push that genre forward. And I think a lot of our favourite artists are American as well.
That's one of the reasons we're so excited to be here as well, because we really feel that love and respect for musical theatre, and it's just brilliant.
Definitely. And I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I think there's sometimes, especially in the UK, the feeling that musical theatre can only tell certain stories and certain kind of surface level themes without much nuance, and I think that there's so many fantastic American examples which show that is not the case. So Freya and I, we've always been a huge fan of Candor and Ebb in particular. The way they deal with these kind of knotty, nuanced themes, fantastic female characters as well, and just amazing songs. And I think one big inspiration for this show, well, it's been both cabaret, but Chicago particularly, in terms of how they use songs as a device to kind of control the narrative or show a certain perspective of the world. I think that people sometimes say that when a character can no longer speak the words, they go into they'll burst into song. I think that's certainly true for some songs, but I think it's also a way, even if people aren't overwhelmed by an emotion, sometimes they might sing a song to as a weapon, as a bit of a control. I'm thinking something like Razzle Dazzle from Chicago, in terms of how Billy Flynn is capturing the audience's attentions and saying this is what you need to focus on, or they both reach for the gun in terms of his puppeteering. Yeah. And we thought Annie is so similar in many ways to people like Billy Flynn, people like Harold Hill and the Music Man, just kind of those fast talking wise guys who can kind of sell a story, snake oil salesman. And I think for a decent part of the show, Annie is that person controlling the narrative, keeping things on track, occasional slip-ups, and then, nope, we're back on. This is the story. This is the story we're telling, until it all falls apart. I won't try and give too much more information.
But yeah, just like following on from that as well, it's kind of like one thing we love about musical theatre and writers like Hannah and Eb, it's often about like Antoine time, like subtext, like what's not being said in the song, and like finding, like seeing what's between the lines and what are the gaps, and that's something that we've drawn upon for this show as well.
Yeah, I have to say, and you know, I'm biased because this is my theater, but I fell in love with the music instantly. I mean, the score is just gorgeous. And I wonder, actually, and this is a question for Sarah, you mentioned that there was a theatricality in the script that you recognized, and can you talk a little bit about that? And because I know that, you know, we as theater artists talk about, well, something is theatrical or something can be, you know, told in a theatrical way, and sometimes that's not clear as to what that means. So I'm curious as to what it means to you.
Yeah, well, I think it comes from loads of different directions in this show. I think starting with Annie's character, you know, her whole demeanour is around storytelling, and her whole belief is that the story is better than the truth, and that's what she peddles. And they, you know, within that is just inherently this opportunity to kind of play with, you know, distraction, sleight of hand, all of the things that the tools of theatre can do. So I just sort of looked at this piece and thought, I can throw everything at this, like, you know, in a really exciting way. You know, it feels like it justifies why the lights are there, justifies why we may use magic, you know, and why the set might evolve, and why the props are there, and you can kind of see them as props and see them as not as props, and she can take your mind in those two directions. One minute they're something magical, next minute they are just a thing on a stage. So there was just so much about her that just meant, you know, this is the only way to tell it. So I think that's where I started, really. And obviously the music's amazing, and it just, you know, makes you need to do stuff, you know.
Is musical theater, Sarah, your jam? Is it what you love most, or?
Well, no, I love all theatre, but really I came from a theatre background. I think that's why I was so taken with what Jack and Freya wrote, because to me it felt like it had the kind of level of content, of psychological content that you would expect from a play without music, or kind of similar to the conversations you're having. I think in the UK there's a really funny attitude, isn't there? And then maybe a lot of the work doesn't have that depth. And I sort of came across this piece and just thought this has incredible depth, and being able to really apply that to every aspect of it was really exciting to me.
So as the piece has evolved through the different iterations, what are you, the three of you, trying to do in every time it goes back on stage?
I think in this, what feels great about this production is that, I mean, this is the biggest space we've ever had, and the largest audiences we've ever had. And it's meant that we can, well, Sarah and the production team have been able to kind of push things to the limit more. So, you know, we were talking about magic and sort of sleight of hand and stuff like that. And it's just been possible for you to really run with that in this environment where there's so much for us to access. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously her story is huge. She cycles around the world. So how do you do that? How do you take people into on that journey? And yeah, being given this bigger space and a bigger audience has enabled us to do bigger gestures and get some more bike action on the stage.
More dynamic.
More bike.
We've for the show we've been lucky enough to work with two fantastic orchestrators, Macy Schmidt in New York and Sam Young in London, and this is the first time so ever since the introduction of the show, even when it was in a
basically a box.
Yeah, an 80-person venue, and it was 1 hour in length, and we were moving cardboard boxes around to create the world that Annie was inhabiting. We always really wanted an overture for the show, and that was our dream. So this is the first iteration of the show where we've been able to have that, putting all the musical themes together, and interweaving some narrative stuff in a really interesting way as well. So really excited for that.
Yeah.
May I ask, when you have a duo writing team, who gets to say, oh, listen to this song, let's use this melody? How does that work?
Well, I'm sure it's different for every partnership. But I think one thing that's really works well for me and Jack is that because we've known each other for so long, we've got a shorthand where we don't need to be polite. We can cut through all of that, and it saves us a lot of time, I imagine. And I think because we've been working together and because we've known each other for so long, we don't always have to kind of say even what our thoughts are. We kind of we can sort of ping off each other. Yeah, and I mean, we are quite unusual in the sense that you might often have with collaborators one person who does exclusively like the book and the lyrics, and then the other person does the music. But Jack and I, we both do music and lyrics. On Ride, you've done a bit more of the music overall, and then I do the book pretty much exclusively, with a few jokes thrown in from Jack because he's funny. But yeah, so we kind of, and we often, one of us will lead on a song, so one will start it and we'll kind of do the music and lyrics together, and then we'll share it with the other person and the other person will refine it. That's probably our main way of working, but sometimes if we're in a room together, we'll just jam it out. So I think for the title song, Ride, that was one of those. Definitely for the chorus, because I remember writing that chorus with you. But sometimes we have false memories and we disagree. And I'm like, I'm sure that happened that way. Did that happen that way?
I don't think it quite did. So the way I remember it, I'd written a verse and the chords for a chorus, and then any kind of melodies that I tried to put over it just weren't working or sounded derivative of our other stuff. And we're like, okay, let's go away. And I think you had a brainwave and said, you sent me a voice note at like 11 p.m. and said, could we try this maybe? And
so it was me.
Yeah,
great.
Well, I should have kept that to myself.
Yeah.
I think what's really helpful about, because as Freya said, in some writing partnerships it's slightly more rigid in terms of who does lyrics and music, and when we are the finesser of the other person's song, so one of us will often get it 75% of the way and the other person will do the final 25% and maybe make some notes about some of the elements of it. And I think we know each other so well that if we ever pick up on, like, I'm not so sure about this line, the other person will generally say, yeah, I wasn't sure either. Yeah. And I feel like occasionally, if we are both fighting for something, we'll just kind of ask each other, like, how strongly do you feel about this? And if one person feels very strongly and the other person couldn't really care too much, we'll defer to the other person. And vice versa. It's only then really an issue if there's ever moments where we both feel very strongly in different directions. But I feel it doesn't happen.
That doesn't really happen that much. Yeah,
it hasn't come to blows or anything.
Not yet.
It sounded like from the timing of writing it that it actually took place over the pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. So we were part of a festival in London, Vault Festival, and our show was scheduled, I think it was the first week of March 2020. So it was actually in London the week before everything shut down. So, I mean, yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that the whole trajectory for the show might have been very different if we'd just been scheduled a week later, because our London producers that we're still with now came to see that show and they picked it up from there. So, yeah, who knows? I mean, we were so lucky with that. But, yeah, it meant that we then had like a year and a half of rewriting because there was nothing else to do.
yeah, very, very conscious that there's definitely a different version of the world now where Ride didn't go ahead, and we're so lucky we had the opportunity to get out there, that first version of the show, and then use parts of lockdown to rewrite, have conversation with producers and such. Yeah,
added some more songs in at that point. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, I have so many questions about process because I personally am just so fascinated by it. So you've written this 20-minute, say starting with the 20-minute version. Do you see it in your mind's eye, what it might look like, or do you rely entirely on the director for that?
Well, I think that... Well, who was directing it for that one? There was a director attached to...
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For the 20-minute version, we had...
it was kind of part of a commission that was sharing like 20-minute versions of stories about different women from history. And so like lots of different pieces came together and they all kind of got allocated a director, and we didn't really have that much to do with that.
And then for the 2020 version, so the 1 hour version and the workshop version, 2021 version, you were directing that as well. So it was your job to kind of think of that at the same time.
At that point, we were doing everything. So like we were wearing many hats, and it's really nice to not have to wear all the hats.
So
we were playing in the band for that one as well.
Oh my God.
So there was a moment in every process, both for Ride and the show we did before, the Limit, which we also did at the Vault Festival, where at kind of the 2 days before our first performance, Freya would say, I can no longer stand at the front now. I've got to rely on someone else's eyes, and I've got to go and play on the piano. And
yeah.
And so, Sarah, when you come into a process like that, where the piece is essentially being created out of thin air, right? Just as far as imagining it, how much of that image in your mind's eye do you create so that it actually lands on the stage, or do you sit back and say, I'm gonna collaborate with the writers on this and figure out this world?
Yeah, it's a real combination of things, because I think, like anything, when something's come from your mind, it can stay like that, and you need, from all of our points of view, and the great thing about musical theatre is it's the truly collaborative kind of art form of creation. So I think that everybody's brain within this has contributed to what the vision of it is. So, a huge part of the process for me is working with the designer, because, and I said to them, we need to take them around the world. We need that, I've had this whole list of things we needed to do with this piece, and all of the very many stories that are happening simultaneously through Ride, some more major, some more minor, but they're all existing and we need to hold them all. And we've got 2 people. How do we take people? What do we do with that? That has its challenges. And then working with the designer, they then inspire me by coming back with kind of what they've heard from me, and then we come back to the writers and we talk about intent, and then we talk about interpretation, and then there's so many different collaborators, and then the choreography, the choreographer. So for me, it's beautifully collaborative, and it feels so. In that sense, like Annie, it feels like a really wonderful kind of female like leadership kind of model, which feels really, really wonderful. And I think that's how we've got to where we've got to, through constant conversation between departments.
I definitely want to touch on that in a moment. But first, I just want to say, how lovely is that to write something and then a couple years later to sit back and just watch it unfold?
Well,
what's that like?
It's honestly crazy. And like I was saying to Jack when we were in like notes after the first preview, like it was so weird to be sat there with like so many people who are working on the show, when before it was like the 2 of us. And yeah, it's just incredible. And I think to be able to sort of work with people who have their set expertise, and they're bringing things that we could never have imagined to the piece, like the lighting and the set and the costume and all of this, and it's just so beautiful, and it's surreal, and it's like just this production is really like more than we could have ever hoped for, really. It's just, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Sarah, you mentioned a women-led project, and I definitely concur. I feel like the feminine power is strong with this one. But especially with regards to the parenting that's happening while we're all working, right? Some of you, maybe when you walked in, you saw a baby who actually is right there. She's so cute. Her name is Olive, sorry. Anyway, that's Freya's baby, and she is among how many children in this production? There's at least 8.
10? No, there's more like 10.
10.
Yeah.
10
Very
young,
small ones.
yes, under the age of 5?
Yeah, around that.
Yeah, under the age of 5, from the various creative team members, and many of them have traveled internationally to be here, and are often, and actually, while we were in rehearsal, we did set up a room for all the children to play in while their parents were working. And look, I don't want to discount the fact that many parents have worked on theater for years and years, and certainly here, it's not the first time we've had working parents on our stage or behind the scenes. But this was special because I think, you know, especially Sarah has really led the charge in making sure that we embrace this model of the working family. And I'd love it if you... She agrees. And Sarah, I know you talk a lot about this also in the UK. I'd love it if you just share a bit about what that experience has been and what drives you to create these work environments.
Yeah, I remember when I first found out I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was at the Old Vic Theatre in London, which is a really amazing theatre, and I was on a programme there as a director, and the day we started the programme, I'd found out I was pregnant that day. So the photo shoot, I'm just like, it's very funny. Everyone was like, "You were a bit crazy that day." I was like, "Oh, here's some information," just to make more sense. And I suddenly had this feeling that I kind of was like, "Why am I so panicked?" You know? And I realised it's because I don't think that our industry. I can't speak for things in the States, but historically has been very kind to women, particularly having children, and especially if you're freelance, because I'm sure it's the same over here, we don't get any benefits, we don't get any financial benefits. So there's just a whole load of things that come with having children and being female identifying and being in our industry as a freelancer. And I just suddenly felt this absolute dread, and I thought this is a strange mix of feelings I'm having. And shit doesn't feel quite right. And so I kind of decided, cynically, to talk quite a lot about it in a way to slightly protect myself, and also to protect others. So I thought I'm going to sort of talk about how supportive they're being and things, which they were, and be a bit more vocal about it. And suddenly I just getting all these messages and all these, messages on social media and people coming up to me and wanting to talk about it, people who were frightened to think about having a family because they thought it would be the end of their career, like to just be blunt about it, or people who had left the industry because they couldn't manage it. And it just felt like there was something that we just needed to be having some better conversations about it. So yeah, I kind of continued that work and tried to champion things and support people individually. And I'm in the process of developing a return to work program for freelancers, because it's just a really different journey. You don't get the benefits, you don't get any phased return, there's no kind of conversation. You get thrown into a new work situation, expecting to work in the same way you did. And I think, our lead actress in this, Alex, has an 8-month-old baby. She auditioned for us when her baby was 5 months, and that was coincidence to her being the right person and an incredible person. And it just felt so meaningful that I was able to lead that process of her coming back to work, her first job, after her life has changed forever, and really support her to kind of to feel strong and feel held in that. So yeah, there's lots I could say. But but yeah, the Old Globe were amazing, and my 2 have been over here, and they've been just hanging around the theatre and had a really, and for me it's been amazing to have them close to me. That means I'm in a happier place to work as well, because I know that they're near and they're safe and they're happy. And so yeah. Thanks Old Globe.
No, and I think it's amazing. We were in that interview together, and I overheard you saying something like, "I see my children more now than when when they had to be at home and I couldn't be at home." And I just thought, wow, how fortunate we've been, and I personally, my kids have grown up at the Old Globe, and now my daughter is a freshman in college, and so, you know, I was pregnant during my interview here, so it's just crazy how much time has flown, and how things have changed for working parents, and how I believe, you know, we've set things up in a way that's a little bit more comfortable for
It's just about
families.
flexibility. It's just about thinking about flexibility. And for me, it's just about access. And that goes for everybody who has access needs. It's about thinking about the way we work in a more flexible way that can support everyone, regardless of that being childcare, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and thank you. And in particular, I think it's such a great thing that this has to be that it's happening while we are telling the story about this incredible dynamic woman at a time when she wasn't getting the kinds of opportunities that we have today, and she was in fact quite marginalized and mistreated, and I congratulate all of you for bringing this person, this wonderful human being to life in this story. I think it's just magnificent, and bravo you for doing such an amazing job. I'd love to open it up to our audience if there are any questions that you have. Yes, let's start here. And I think we have, yes, someone will come around with a microphone so that you can speak your question into the mic, please.
You obviously play instruments, and do you compose digitally electronic piano or just on paper, and do you sing the melodies, and how do you do it?
Yeah, in fact, that hit a nail on the head a little bit in terms of a lot of the time. So my main instrument is guitar, Freya's is piano, and in fact, when we talked about that kind of one person leading a song way of working that we mentioned, particularly, I think it's harder to tell now that we've got all the orchestrations, but listening to earlier versions of the show, you could generally see who was leading on the song by whether it was guitar-led or piano-led. But a lot of the time we will, so we write by ear primarily, and then we'll score it afterwards. So we'll make sure we're happy with it, how it sounds out loud, sing it together, sing it with instruments, before dedicating it to paper and then sending it over to our fantastic orchestrators to add 15 more instruments in. But we'll often make kind of voice notes on our phone where we think, oh, that could be a nice melody, and then build a chord structure around that.
Hundreds of voice notes, basically. Yeah. If you find our phones, it's just like a mess of voice notes.
And they've both got really amazing voices. Freya's voice is stunning.
Well, I can't sing the songs in Ride, though.
It's funny going back through our kind of half garbled voice notes on our phone and seeing the songs, seeing the fragments of songs that eventually turn into the stuff on Ride, because I would be ashamed to show that to most people.
Let's hope those things are never found. Yeah.
And we have a question here.
When the two of you are writing, how much of your time do you work separately, and how much time do you spend together working?
We spend quite a lot of our time working separately because we live in different places now. So we both used to live in London, and when we were living in London, we would usually kind of dedicate one weekend, like a Sunday or something, one day every weekend, to writing in the same room. But I've moved out of London, and so a lot of our work is done remotely now. Although we will sort of have Zoom sessions, which you'd think would not work that well, but actually they've been quite productive. And I think, because I have Olive now, my baby, time is, it's a lot trickier. So in a way, it's like we know we need to be really focused for this like 2-hour session. And in a way, it's kind of helped with that. But we still love to kind of get together. And I think usually we'll plan it so we'll do remote sessions, and then we'll get together and do like 3 or 4 days in a row, where we really try to refine material or get a project off its feet. And like Freya said, we'll with those writing weekends, we can often get kind of 4 or 5 half-finished ideas, and then we'll work separately to finesse those and get them in a slightly better state. Yeah.
So lyrics first or melody first?
That's a very good question. It's really a mix. I'd say probably I'd say
It's quite organic.
Yeah.
Like I think we probably often start with a hook, like a hook line. So we'll have like a lyric and the tune for that little bit of lyric that then may become the title of the song. And then the rest of the number is kind of built around that idea, would you say?
I'd say, yeah. Hook or intention of the song as well. Music, lyrics often. But yeah, there's never too fixed a pattern. And there's been many songs where Freya's done all the music for it and I've done all the lyrics, and vice versa as well. So where we have gone for a slightly more traditional songwriting split just because of the way it's worked out. The one thing we really try and focus on when writing a new piece is song spotting first, going through the structure to make sure it makes sense, because the worst thing in the world is writing a song that you fall in love with and you think is beautiful, and then it has no place whatsoever in the musical, and it...
Well, then you keep it for your next musical, right? Or something.
Oh, we have done that a few times.
Not with Ride.
Not with Ride. Ride was all written for Ride.
Yes, there's a hand back there. Someone's coming.
So you're talking about what's going to be next.
Yeah, writing wise. Yeah.
How about just in terms of projects
Everybody?
for the three of you? Sure.
Yeah, so we're writing another two-hander that's set in contemporary England, which is a bit of a departure for us because usually we do historical stories. And it's about a relationship between a university professor and a student and kind of power play and abuse of power. And we're also working on a project that's about Louisa May Alcott, writer of Little Women, and kind of the relationship between her fictional Little Women and her real life sisters, who she based the story on, that kind of tension between creating characters who become sort of world renowned and beloved, and then sort of having to exist as that character, but in real life. So yeah, so early days, but yeah, that's what we're working on.
How about you, Sarah?
I seem to have developed a niche for historical women because I'm working on the first English language version of the Korean hit musical Marie Curie, about amazing Marie Curie, and telling her story. So 2 weeks after I get back into London, I'm into that. So I've been having lots of interestingly timed Zooms over here with the London and Korea, and so to get that all going. But yeah, that should be really exciting to tell her story. And there's kind of a few parallels really, and it's the same time period, which is such an exciting time in history, where the world, there was so much possibility, wasn't there, and so many people doing amazing things. Yeah.
Wow. Any other? There's one in the back, and then gentleman up here.
So not only this particular production, which is very female forward, but it sounds like quite a few of your productions are quite female forward. And I was wondering how Jack feels as the sole Y chromosome in the thing about being involved in these kind of productions.
In terms of like, I think whenever we've set out to write, so as an example, The Limit, which we wrote about a year before Ride, we've always been really keen to work with as many female creatives, female and non-binary, and female in the cast as well. What was quite tricky about Sophie Germain's story was that a lot of the people who... Oh, sorry. I should explain who's Sophie Germain. So she was an 18th century French mathematician who was absolutely fantastic and made real advances in the field of number theory and with elasticity as well.
It's a hard one.
So notably, her work made the building of the Eiffel Tower possible many years after her death. And the Eiffel Tower is laden with famous French mathematicians, poets, scientists, and her name is not on there, unfortunately. But it just seemed like such an interesting story. One of the obstacles we found was that many of the people in Sophie's life that helped out, and many people in her life generally were men. So we wanted to work with experiment with multi-rolling and have females playing male characters, which we do in Ride as well, although it's slightly more baked into the piece. I think in terms of my contributions when writing female pieces, I try to always make sure to because you're writing the book, to defer to your expertise in terms of telling the story. I will contribute where I can in terms of story structure and music, obviously, as well. But I'm always quite wary of stepping on people's toes who know better than me, essentially. And so, yeah, I think with all of our projects, we've been really lucky to work with fantastic female creatives, which it's not always the case that it's a female-heavy room. I think, particularly in London as well.
Yeah, I know we had a question up here.
Forgive if you've answered this because I came in a few minutes late. When the seed is planted to tell a story, is your imperative, that sounds like an interesting story to share, like a Louisa May Alcott dichotomy? Or is it, I need to tell a story about women bicycling across the globe, which comes out of air?
I don't think it's maybe just a bit of both. I don't know if that's a sort of cowardly answer, but I think, well, certainly for me, and I think you probably agree, Jack, I can't dedicate, because it takes so long to write a musical, years really. So I have to be fully invested, otherwise it's just never going to go anywhere. So I have to fall in love with the story. You have to fall in love with the story. And I think, what attracted us to Ride was this amazing woman and what she did, and the fact that she did cycle around the world. And that's why it sort of started. And we thought, this is just going to be a celebratory kind of women are amazing piece. But actually, I think as writers, we're really interested in character. And it's really Annie's character and kind of the unexpected aspects of her character and this fascinating backstory that she has that drew us in more than her cycling endeavour, and is kind of what makes Ride kind of, I suppose, unique. And it's not, there are plenty of shows that are just kind of here's a poster woman, and in fact our show The Limit kind of is that, and that was the one we wrote before Ride. And I think I prefer Ride, and I feel prouder of Ride because we're really kind of acknowledging that here's this woman who wasn't perfect. She did something radical and incredible, but she's flawed, and she's mean, and she's done bad things as well. And let's explore that on a stage when you don't often see that in musicals with female characters. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's both wanting to fall in love with the story and making sure it works for a musical as well. There's nothing worse than writing something or seeing something where you think this would have made a fantastic play, but it just doesn't sing in the same way. Why does it need songs? Basically, that's one of the first questions we ask ourselves. And if we can't answer that question, then we just need to throw the idea in the bin.
We had a question here, and then that'll be our final question, actually.
This has been an amazing discussion. I really appreciate your thoughts about all this, and especially about the little ones and all that. I thought that was great. But where does Ride go from here?
I mean, to be completely honest with you, we don't know. And I find we're kind of usually the last people, Jack and I, are the last people to know what's going on with Ride. But hopefully lots of amazing things, and hopefully it won't be the last that we see of it in the States. But to be honest, we don't know. But we just hope it pedals on forever and ever and ever.
Yeah. We'd love to take it further, but I think our focus at the moment is getting it right in San Diego, putting on the best show possible, listening to feedback, and we'd love to take it further.
And every version that we've done has been different, so we're really gunning for that definitive version. So maybe this will be it.
Well, I can't tell you how proud we are at the Globe to be presenting this amazing show. So thank you for your incredible work. And all of you, bring your friends. I know some of you are seeing it tonight. You'll have a blast. And I know some of you are going to be coming back. So thank you to everybody, and enjoy the show tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.